Welcome. This presentation will provide an overview of xACTION. The best way to explain xACTION is to look at what it can do. We'll start with example scenarios. Then, we'll look at how xACTION works. Finally, we'll take a look at xACTION.
What if completion of an education program consisting of multiple learning events automatically created an online digital badge? xACTION can accept multiple xAPI statements from different learning record stores, or LRS, and match them to rules. Once all the rules defined to receive a digital badge or credential are met, xACTION can call the REST API of a digital badge system to grant the badge.
What if you could document competence based on activities in multiple systems, so work teams can be assembled nimbly? xACTION can receive xAPI statements from multiple sources. For example, a student may have attended a learning event. Then they practiced the task or skill, and then was assessed against the competency standards. xACTION receives the associated xAPI statements for those events, matches them to statement rules, and when all rules are matched, it makes a REST API call to a competency management system to record the competency. What if an internet-connected IV pump could automatically lock out if a nurse's training expired? xACTION could receive an xAPI statement indicating that required training has expired. It could then call a REST API on the IoT device to deny access. This applies to many IoT device examples. For example, you could have an area secured by a digital badge reader. If the area requires training to enter, xACTION could disable a person's access if it received an xAPI statement indicating that training had expired.
What if you could eliminate noise by forwarding only the xAPI statements you want to an authoritative LRS? The Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, or ADL, has developed the concept of a noisy versus an authoritative LRS. The noisy LRS captures all the xAPI statements coming out, such as which content pages were visited, the answers submitted for each test question, etc. This is great information for L&D and helps them improve their content. The authoritative LRS is only interested in things like completions, test scores, and items that should be part of a person's permanent learning record. xACTION can be used to only forward desired statements from the noisy to the authoritative LRS. While there are other systems that can selectively forward statements, xACTION can require that multiple statements be received before one of them is forwarded. And xACTION can anonymize forwarded statements. For example, if you were forwarding statements to a system for analytics, you may not want to include personally identifiable information, or PII.
What if you could translate statements from rapid authoring tools to your own vocabulary? Many organizations using xAPI would like to define their own standardized vocabulary. For example, the Department of Defense has a project called Master Object Model, or MOM, to look at this right now. But most third-party tools don't let you change the vocabulary for xAPI statements. xACTION can receive statements, and allow you to replace pieces of incoming statements that don't conform to your standardized vocabulary. It then forwards a new statement to an LRS.
What if you completed online training on how to use your new Tesla, which then unlocks and starts? As we searched around for APIs we could use to make working examples for xACTION, we ran across the Tesla API, which is actually quite extensive. You can turn the car on, start the engine, unlock the door, and summon the vehicle via APIs. The pandemic of the early 2020s created the need to quickly replace hands-on learning with virtual reality options in many organizations. In highly regulated industries, recording training in an LMS is required. xACTION helps bridge the gap and handles the statements between these systems.
So how does xACTION do all these magical things? Well, first, there is an xAPI endpoint that receives statements. It looks like other xAPI statement endpoints, but it is write-only. Next, the statement receiver forwards authorized statements to the pattern matching engine. This engine matches incoming statements to trigger rules. We'll take a look at how rules are created in the xACTION Administrator tool later in this presentation. When all the rules associated with a particular trigger are matched, xACTION notifies its outbound processing engine. This makes the outbound REST API calls, forward statements, and sends transformed statements. A key benefit of xACTION is that enterprise systems don't need to understand xAPI in order to take action based on learning data. As long as a system has REST APIs, xACTION can likely talk to them. When sending an outbound REST API call, xACTION can include properties from the xAPI statements in the call. For example, if you were calling an API in an LMS, you would likely need to include information about the actor in the incoming statements. At Risk, our Virtual Training Assistant LMS, or VTA, has an API that will give credit for completion of a course. To do so, it needs an identifier for the student and the course and the student's completion date. We extract all of this from the xAPI statements and include it in the call to the REST API. xACTION can require multiple rule matching statements before outbound actions are processed. So, you could have a student complete an entire learning path, with statements sent to xACTION from more than one LRS. Once all rules are matched, xACTION would call an API on an HRIS to record that the learning path has been completed.
xAPI can be chatty. Content can send statements indicating a student experienced a page, answered a test question, clicked a button, and so on. While that information is useful to the content designer, it is probably not important in the lifelong learning history for the student. That's where the concept of a noisy versus authoritative LRS is useful. xACTION can match multiple inbound statements to rules and then forward one or more of them to an authoritative LRS, removing the clutter of the noisy LRS. As mentioned earlier, the forwarded statements may be anonymous if desired. xACTION can also create entirely new xAPI statements based on xAPI data received and matched by the pattern matching engine. These new statements ensure that your authoritative LRS receives consistent data every time with the vocabulary you define. The statement transformation feature of xACTION allows you to combine properties of the inbound statements with entirely new values. For example, you could replace one object ID with another. Or, you can send entirely new statements. And, as with forwarded statements, transformed statements allow you to use either an anonymous actor, or the actor from the inbound statements.
At the core of xACTION are triggers. Triggers consist of rules to match and actions to execute once those rules are matched. If you have questions about xACTION, or would like a guided demonstration, contact RISC by calling 281-480-7910, or email us at info@xaction.online. Visit xaction.online to learn more.